The moment will forever be seared in my memory. There I stood in my own backyard, hosting my first BBQ as a homeowner at 24, when my mother pointed at me in front of everyone and screamed those words, "You stole your brother's future!" I had supported myself since 16, worked 2 jobs through college, skipped vacations, and finally achieved my dream through pure grit. Yet somehow, my success was treachery. A week later, the papers arrived. My parents were actually suing me for ruining Trevor's chances in life. What happened next? Trust me, karma has a wicked sense of humor. I grew up in a cookie-cutter suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a house that looked perfectly normal from the outside. My parents, Jack and Martha Wilson, had decent jobs, Dad as a sales manager at an office supply company, and Mom as an administrative assistant at the local high school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I thought. My brother Trevor was 2 years younger than me. From my earliest memories, there was always a pattern in our house. When Trevor needed new sports equipment, the money appeared. When I needed anything, I was told to be patient. When Trevor struggled with homework, Mom would spend hours helping him. When I asked for help, I got, "Lose. You're smart enough to figure it out yourself." I accepted this as normal for years. I was the responsible one, the independent one. I took pride in it, actually, until the night everything changed. I was 16 and heading to the kitchen for a late-night snack when I heard my parents talking in hushed tones at the dining table. They were reviewing finances, something they never did in front of us kids. "Trevor's college fund is looking good," Dad said. "If we keep adding at this rate, he'll have enough for state university, even if he doesn't get a scholarship." "That's a relief," Mom replied. "With his baseball potential, he might get some athletic money too." I paused in the hallway, waiting to hear them mention my college fund next. Instead, there was silence. Then, "What about Luz?" Dad asked. Mom sighed. "She'll figure something out. She always does. Besides, Trevor needs the support more. He has special potential." The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. I'd always assumed they had been saving for both of us. I'd been planning to apply to several universities the following year. Good ones. I had a 4 gigapascals and was active in 3 different clubs, but apparently none of that mattered. I retreated silently to my bedroom and sat on my bed, numb. The next morning, I asked them directly about college funds over breakfast. "Well, honey," Mom said, sharing a quick glance with Dad, "we've been focusing on Trevor's education. You're so capable. We know you'll find scholarships or something. So there's nothing saved for me?" I pressed, my voice steady despite the hurt churning inside. Dad cleared his throat. "Luz, let's be practical. Trevor has special needs and potential. You've always been independent." Trevor, sitting next to me, smirked slightly into his cereal. That afternoon, I walked to Sunrise Diner, a family restaurant about a mile from our house. They had a help wanted sign in the window. By evening, I had my first job as a hostess, working weekends and after school. I didn't tell my parents until after I started. Not that they asked many questions about where I was going. "A job?" Mom frowned when I finally mentioned it. "Won't that interfere with your studies?" "I need to save for college," I said simply. "Don't be dramatic, Luz," Dad said. "There are scholarships and loans." I didn't argue. I just worked. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account. I bought my own clothes, school supplies, and even paid for my own senior pictures later on. My grades never slipped. I studied late into the night if necessary. By graduation, I had almost $8,000 saved. It wasn't enough for a university, but it was something. I graduated as salutatorian, second in my class of 300 students. At my graduation party, which I largely organized myself, my parents gave me a card with $50. Most of their attention was focused on Trevor, who had just made the varsity baseball team as a sophomore. "We're so proud of you," an aunt told me. "Your parents must be thrilled with your achievements." I watched as my mother showed someone pictures of Trevor in his baseball uniform. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "They're very supportive." That night, I made a decision. I would attend the local community college while continuing to work. I would transfer to a university later. I would build my future brick by brick if necessary. When I told my parents, Dad nodded absently. Community college is probably smart for someone in your situation. And what situation is that? I asked. Well, he gestured vaguely, limited resources. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out whose choice that was. That summer before college, I picked up more shifts at the diner and added a second job at a local bookstore. My plan was taking shape. What I couldn't know then was how my independence would eventually be twisted into something my family would try to punish me for. Community college was a blessing in disguise. While my high school friends posted pictures from their freshman orientations at state universities, I was dividing my time between classes, the diner, and my new job at Dawn Brew, a coffee shop that opened at 5 in the morning. My typical day started at 4:30 when I dragged myself out of bed in the small apartment I shared with 2 other community college students. I'd work the morning rush at Dawn Brew until 11, then race to campus for afternoon classes. 3 evenings a week, I'd work the dinner shift at Sunrise Diner. On weekends, I'd pick up as many shifts as possible at both jobs. It was during one particularly exhausting shift at the diner that I met Diane. She was the new manager, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "You're working yourself into the ground, girl," she said one night as I counted my tips. "What's the goal here?" Something about her direct manner made me open up. I told her about my situation, working to put myself through school with 0 family support. Instead of pity, her eyes showed respect. "My parents couldn't help me either. But you're smarter than I was at your age. I waited tables for 15 years before figuring out there are better ways to build security." Over the following weeks, Diane became the mentor I never knew I needed. She'd built a modest real estate portfolio on a server's income and was now managing the diner while overseeing her rental properties. "Real estate is the most accessible path to wealth for people like us," she explained, showing me the numbers on her properties. "Everyone needs a place to live, and they'll pay you for the privilege." I soaked up her knowledge like a sponge. I changed my major from general studies to finance and business. I started reading every book on real estate investing that the library offered. Meanwhile, I barely saw my family. I'd stop by for obligatory holiday dinners where the conversation inevitably centered around Trevor's baseball games or his social life. No one asked about my classes or my work. It stung, but I was too busy to dwell on it. Near the end of my second year at community college, I got a letter that changed everything. I'd been accepted to transfer to Michigan State University with a partial merit scholarship. It wouldn't cover everything, but combined with my savings and continued work, I could make it happen. I called my parents, genuinely excited to share the news. "That's nice, honey," Mom said distractedly. "Did you hear Trevor's having some trouble with his classes? His English teacher is so unreasonable." "What's going on?" I asked, my news forgotten. "He's failing 2 classes. But it's not his fault. These teachers don't understand that athletes have different needs. Your father is meeting with the principal tomorrow." I bit my lip. Trevor had always gotten second and third chances that would never have been offered to me. When I stopped by the house that weekend to pick up some old textbooks I'd stored there, I found Mom and Dad at the kitchen table with a pile of brochures from expensive tutoring services. "We're going to have to dip into the college fund a bit," Dad was saying, "but we can't let him fall behind." They barely acknowledged my presence, much less my acceptance to Michigan State. When I finally mentioned it, Mom blinked in surprise. "Community college wasn't enough?" she asked. "It's so much more expensive at state." "I got a scholarship," I said. "And I've been saving." Dad frowned. "Just don't take on debt, Luz. You know we can't help if you get in over your head." As if I didn't already know that. That fall, I moved into a tiny apartment near the Michigan State campus with Allie Henderson, a girl I'd met through the transfer student program. Allie came from a wealthy family in Grand Rapids, and initially seemed like my complete opposite. She'd never worked a day in her life and had a closet full of designer clothes, but we clicked immediately. "I've never met anyone like you," she told me after I'd explained my work schedule. "My parents micromanage my whole life. They even chose my major. And my parents couldn't care less what I do," I laughed, "unless it affects my brother somehow." Allie introduced me to her social circle, but I rarely had time for parties. Between classes, my weekend job at the diner back home, and a new part-time position at a campus coffee shop, I was stretched thin. One evening, as I was frantically studying for a finance exam, Allie brought her Uncle Brian to our apartment. Brian Parker owned a real estate development company in Lansing. "Allie tells me you're the hardest working person she's ever met," he said after introductions. "And you're interested in real estate?" Our conversation lasted hours. By the end, Brian had offered me a part-time position at his company with hours I could work around my class schedule. The pay was better than the coffee shop, and the experience would be invaluable. Just as my professional life was coming together, I heard through family gossip that Trevor had been kicked out of his first-choice university for failing too many classes. "It's the school's fault," Mom insisted when I called to check on the situation. "They recruit these talented athletes, then don't support them properly." Within weeks, my parents had pulled strings through their network to get Trevor accepted into another college. They dipped further into his college fund to hire specialized tutors and buy him a new car so he wouldn't have to worry about transportation. Meanwhile, I graduated with my associate's degree with a 3.9 gigapascals while working nearly full-time. Not one member of my family attended the ceremony. At Michigan State, I thrived despite my hectic schedule. Working for Brian gave me practical experience that made my finance and business classes come alive. I started to see opportunities everywhere. Despite earning more, I continued living like a broke student. While my classmates and even Allie spent money on clothes, restaurants, and spring break trips, I put 70% of my income into savings and investments. "You're missing out on the college experience," Allie would tell me. "I'm building my future," I'd respond. By my senior year, I had an impressive resume, excellent grades, and a growing investment account. I'd taken Diane's advice and started studying the local real estate market. There was a neighborhood on the east side of Lansing that was showing early signs of revitalization. Property values were still low, but a new tech company had announced plans to open offices nearby. I could see the potential that others couldn't yet, and I was positioning myself to take advantage of it. My final year of college tested every limit I had. I was taking a full course load of senior-level finance and real estate classes while working 30 hours a week at Brian's company. My sleep schedule was a joke, 4 or 5 hours on good nights, less on bad ones. Allie worried about me. "You're going to collapse one day," she said, finding me asleep on our couch, surrounded by textbooks and market analysis printouts. "No investment is worth your health." "I'm not doing this forever," I assured her. "Just until I graduate and get established. Then I can ease up a bit." The truth was, I didn't know how to ease up. Years of self-reliance had made hard work my default setting. While my classmates went to football games and graduation parties, I was analyzing property listings and saving every penny. Brian noticed my dedication too. "You remind me of myself at your age," he told me one day at the office. "Hungry. Focused. But take it from someone who's been there. Don't forget to live a little too." I nodded politely but didn't change my habits. What none of them understood was that financial independence wasn't just a goal for me, it was my security blanket. Growing up with parents who clearly considered me an afterthought had left its mark. I never wanted to need anyone's help ever again. One cold February evening, Allie burst into our apartment bubbling with excitement. "You'll never believe who I ran into at Dad's country club, Professor Harrington from the business department. I mentioned you, and she said you're one of the most promising students she's seen." Then I told Uncle Brian, and he has this crazy idea. The crazy idea turned out to be a surprise graduation gift from Brian and Allie's parents. They wanted to invest $50,000 as seed money for me to start my own real estate venture after graduation. I was stunned. "I can't accept that," I said immediately. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Brian explained when he came over to discuss it. "It's an investment. We'd be silent partners, taking a percentage of profits. You'd have controlling interest and make all the decisions. We believe in you, Luz." The offer was tempting. With that kind of capital, I could accelerate my plans significantly, but something held me back. "I need to do this on my own," I finally decided. "I appreciate the vote of confidence more than you know, but I've mapped out my path, and I need to follow it." Brian seemed to understand, though Allie thought I was crazy. "Only you would turn down free money," she said, shaking her head. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving something to myself, and maybe, in some corner of my heart, to my family as well. Around midterms, I received an unexpected call from my mother. This was unusual. We typically spoke only when I initiated contact. "Trevor's having trouble again," she said without preamble. "He's been asked to leave Lakeside College." This was the second school to kick him out. "What happened?" I asked. "These schools just don't understand how to work with different learning styles," she said defensively. "We're looking at options. Your father is talking to some connections about State University." I bit my tongue. Trevor had now failed out of 2 colleges, while I was about to graduate with honors from Michigan State while working to support myself entirely. "How are you planning to handle the financial side?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Well," Mom hesitated, "that's partly why I'm calling. We've gone through most of Trevor's college fund with the tutors and the previous schools. We were wondering if you might be able to help out a bit. You're working at that real estate place now, right? And you don't have expenses like Trevor does." I nearly dropped the phone. After years of no support, they were actually asking me to help fund Trevor's 3rd attempt at college? "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm not in a position to help financially. I'm still paying my own tuition and saving for my future investments." The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "I thought family was supposed to help each other, Luz." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Meanwhile, my careful planning was starting to pay off. I graduated with honors in May. Brian offered me a full-time position with a substantial salary increase. I accepted on one condition, that I could work remotely 2 days a week to pursue my personal investment projects. My first target was that East Side neighborhood I'd been watching. Property values were beginning to rise as the tech company started construction, but there were still deals to be found. I spent my weekends driving through the area, noting properties that looked neglected but had good bones. The moment will forever be seared in my memory. There I stood in my own backyard, hosting my first BBQ as a homeowner at 24, when my mother pointed at me in front of everyone and screamed those words, "You stole your brother's future!" I had supported myself since 16, worked 2 jobs through college, skipped vacations, and finally achieved my dream through pure grit. Yet somehow, my success was treachery. A week later, the papers arrived. It needed work. The kitchen was straight out of the 1980s, and the bathroom tiles were cracked. But the structure was sound, and the location was perfect. I secured a mortgage at a good rate, thanks to my employment history and down payment. At 24, I became a homeowner. The first person I called was Diane, who had remained a mentor and friend through all these years. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her normally tough voice softening. "You did it your way, with no shortcuts." Next, I called my parents. I wanted them to be proud too, despite everything. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, sounding distracted. "Listen, can I call you back? We're helping Trevor move into his new apartment near State University. They've given him another chance, with a probationary admission." I swallowed my disappointment. "Sure, Mom. Talk to you later." As I tackled renovations on my new house, working evenings and weekends between my regular job, I decided to host a housewarming party once the major projects were complete. Despite everything, I wanted my family to see what I'd accomplished. I spent months painting, replacing fixtures, and updating the kitchen on a tight budget. By early fall, the house was transformed. Not luxurious, but clean, bright, and distinctly mine. I sent invitations to my family, friends from college, coworkers, and of course, Diane. I planned a backyard barbecue, hoping for a casual, celebratory atmosphere. What I got instead was the confrontation that would change everything. The morning of my housewarming barbecue dawned sunny and mild, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. I'd spent the previous day cleaning, prepping food, and arranging the backyard with string lights and rented tables. Though I was exhausted from weeks of renovations followed by party preparations, I felt a surge of pride looking at my home. My home, purchased with money I'd earned, renovated with my own hands. At 24, when many of my peers were still figuring out their career paths or living in rented apartments with roommates, I grew up in a cookie-cutter suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a house that looked perfectly normal from the outside. My parents, Jack and Martha Wilson, had decent jobs. Dad as a sales manager at an office supply company and Mom as an administrative assistant at the local high school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I thought. Every homeowner needs proper tools, she said, giving me a rare hug. Allie and some friends from college arrived next, followed by Brian and a few coworkers. Everyone seemed genuinely impressed with the house and the work I'd done. The value has probably increased 15% already just from your renovations, Brian noted, examining my new kitchen countertops. My family arrived last. Mom, Dad, and Trevor walked into the backyard as a unit, my mother's eyes darting around critically. Dad seemed uncomfortable, hands in his pockets. Trevor looked bored. "This is quite a place," Dad said after awkward hugs. "Seems like a big undertaking for someone your age." "The neighborhood's a bit questionable, isn't it?" Mom added, glancing around at the neighboring houses. "Some were well kept, others needed work, typical for an area in transition." "It's an emerging neighborhood," I explained. "Property values are already climbing because of the new tech campus." Trevor wandered inside, and I followed, eager to show him the renovations. "How much did this set you back?" he asked, running his hand along the new kitchen counter. "I'd rather not discuss the exact numbers," I said carefully. "But I got a good deal, and the mortgage payments are manageable with my salary." "Must be nice," he muttered. "Some of us don't have everything handed to us on a silver platter." I stared at him, speechless. If anyone had things handed to them, it was Trevor, not me. The afternoon progressed with an undercurrent of tension. My parents made small talk with my friends but seemed uncomfortable. I overheard Mom telling Ally's mother that she was surprised I'd taken on such responsibility without consulting the family. As I was serving dessert, Trevor cleared his throat and stood up. "Since we're all here celebrating Luz's success," he said, his voice slightly slurred from the beers he'd been drinking, "I might as well share my news too." All eyes turned to him. My parents looked suddenly alert, almost eager. "I've decided college isn't for me," Trevor announced. "After 3 tries, I think it's pretty clear that's not my path. I'm going to take some time to figure things out. Maybe travel a bit." "That sounds very mature, sweetie," Mom said quickly. "Taking time to find yourself is important." Dad nodded. "We support whatever you decide." I couldn't help but wonder where Trevor would get the money to travel a bit when he had no job and had failed out of 3 colleges. But I kept quiet, not wanting to cause a scene at my own party. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I noticed my mother's eyes kept returning to my house, to the improvements I'd made. She was calculating something. As guests were starting to leave, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "Luz, your father and I have been talking," she said in a low voice. "We think you should help your brother." "Help him how?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. "Well, this house. It's really more than you need right now. And Trevor needs a fresh start. Maybe you could take out a home equity loan? Or sell it and split the proceeds? He's family after all." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I worked for this. Years of double shifts, no vacations, saving every penny. This is my investment in my future." "And what about Trevor's future?" Her voice rose slightly. "You've always been the capable one. He needs support to find his way." "Like he's had his entire life?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. College funds, tutors, second chances, third chances. What about the support I never got? The kitchen had gone quiet. I realized other guests could hear us. "That's different," Mom said stiffly. "You didn't need it." I did need it. I would have loved to have parents who supported me through college instead of working 30 hours a week while taking full-time classes. But I made it work because I had no choice. Dad appeared in the doorway. "What's going on?" "Luz is being selfish," Mom said, her face flushed. "After everything we've done for her." "What exactly have you done for me?" The words burst out before I could stop them. "Name one thing. $1 you contributed to my education or my house or anything in my adult life." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in earshot had frozen, uncomfortable witnesses to our family drama. Trevor pushed his way into the kitchen, face red. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Little Miss Independent. You've always made me look bad." "You've done that all on your own," I shot back. And that's when it happened. My mother, standing in my kitchen, that I had renovated with my own hands, in my house that I had purchased with my own money, pointed at me and screamed, "You stole your brother's future!" The room went completely silent. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "All this success," she gestured wildly around the kitchen, "should have been shared with your family. Trevor could have used your help, your connections, but you've hoarded everything for yourself. You've always been selfish that way." I felt as if I'd been slapped. Hoarded? I worked 2 jobs through college. I skipped vacations. I lived on ramen noodles to save money. How is that hoarding? "And now you have all this," Dad joined in, waving his hand to indicate the house, "while your brother has nothing. Family is supposed to help family. Where was that philosophy when I needed help?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Where was family then?" I grew up in a cookie-cutter suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a house that looked perfectly normal from the outside. My parents, Jack and Martha Wilson, had decent jobs. Dad as a sales manager at an office supply company, and Mom as an administrative assistant at the local high school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I thought. Diane stayed to help clean up, her silence more supportive than any words could have been. "You didn't do anything wrong," she finally said, as we washed dishes side by side. "Some people can't stand to see others succeed, especially when it highlights their own failures, even family." A week later, I was at work when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was a courier service, confirming my address for a delivery requiring signature. The delivery turned out to be legal papers. My parents were suing me for financial support for Trevor, claiming I had an obligation to make things equitable given my unfair advantages and his challenging circumstances. They were demanding half the value of my house, claiming it should have been Trevor's fresh start money. I sat on my front steps, papers in hand, too shocked to cry or scream or do much of anything. The audacity, the sheer absurdity of it, was beyond comprehension. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Nothing personal, just what's fair." Fair. As if anything about our family dynamics had ever been fair. The next morning I took the lawsuit papers to Brian at the office. His usual calm demeanor gave way to disbelief as he read through them. I don't even know what to call this," he said, shaking his head. "It's groundless, of course, but you'll need to respond formally." "I don't know anything about lawsuits," I admitted. "I can't afford an expensive lawyer." Brian's expression softened. "My sister Lauren is a family law attorney. Let me call her." Lauren Parker met with me that same afternoon. She was Brian's opposite in many ways. Where he was soft-spoken and deliberate, she was direct and quick-moving. But they shared the same analytical mind and ethical core. "This lawsuit is ridiculous," she declared after reviewing the documents. "There's no legal basis for parents to demand financial support from an adult child for a sibling. But we need to take it seriously, because ignoring it could result in a default judgment." "What are they thinking?" I asked. "They must know this won't work." Lauren tapped her pen against her legal pad. "Sometimes people file nuisance lawsuits hoping the other party will settle just to make it go away. Is there any chance your parents are in financial trouble and desperate for money?" The question made me realize how little I knew about my parents' current situation. We barely spoke beyond surface pleasantries at obligatory family gatherings. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but they've always put everything into Trevor. If he's flunked out of 3 colleges and now wants to find himself by traveling, they might be stretched thin." "We should look into their financial situation," Lauren said, "and yours. I need to know everything about your finances from age 16 onward. Every job, every account, every penny you saved or spent. We need to document your self-sufficiency." That evening, I started gathering documents, old pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns, scholarship letters, tuition receipts. As I was searching for my earliest bank records, I remembered my first savings account, opened when I was 14 with birthday money from my grandmother. I hadn't used it in years, having transferred most funds to my main account when I started college. I logged in online to check the balance, expecting to find the few $100s I thought I'd left there. The account was empty. According to the transaction history, a withdrawal of the entire balance, $912, had been made 3 weeks earlier, in person, At a branch near my parents' house. I called the bank immediately. Yes. The withdrawal was made with proper ID, and the account password the representative confirmed. It was a joint account, so either party has full access. A joint account. Of course. I'd opened it as a minor, so one of my parents had to be on the account with me. I'd forgotten that detail as the years passed. I relayed this information to Lauren the next morning. They took your money? Her eyebrows shot up. Recently? While preparing to sue you? Apparently, I said, still processing the betrayal myself. This actually helps our case, she said, making notes. It demonstrates their questionable ethics. Did you contribute all the funds to this account yourself? Most of it was gifts from my grandmother and my early babysitting jobs before I turned 16. They never put money into it. Lauren nodded grimly. We'll include this in our countersuit. Countersuit? Yes. We're not just defending against their ridiculous claims. Too, we're countersuing for the stolen funds and legal fees. This is the kind of case that could warrant sanctions against them for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Over the next few weeks, Lauren and I built our defense while also gathering intelligence on my parents' financial situation. What we discovered was troubling. Trevor had student loans from all 3 colleges he'd attended, loans my parents had helped him secure, but the loan amounts exceeded the actual tuition costs significantly. Where had the extra money gone? We need to subpoena their bank records, Lauren decided. I suspect they may have used some of Trevor's student loan money for other purposes. Meanwhile, my parents had launched what could only be described as a smear campaign against me within our extended family and social circle. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly sent messages expressing disappointment in my abandonment of family values. Former neighbors made comments on social media about selfish younger generations. One evening, my Aunt Carol, Mom's sister, called me unexpectedly. I want you to know that not everyone believes their version of events, she said without preamble. I've watched how they've treated you compared to Trevor all your life. This lawsuit is just more of the same. Her support meant more than I could express. They're telling everyone I owe Trevor financial support, I said, as if I haven't earned everything I have. Martha has always enabled Trevor's worst qualities, Aunt Carol sighed, referring to my mother, and Jack goes along with whatever she wants. But this is a new low, even for them. As the court date approached, my anxiety increased. Despite Lauren's assurances that the case was legally baseless, I couldn't shake the fear that somehow the system would fail me, that once again, Trevor would get what he wanted while I would be left to fend for myself. What if the judge is a parent who believes in family obligations above all else? I asked Lauren during one of our prep sessions. What if they think I should help Trevor, regardless of the lack of legal requirement? Judges follow the law, Lauren said firmly, and the law is clear here. Besides, we have overwhelming evidence of your self-sufficiency and their pattern of favoritism. No reasonable person could look at this situation and side with them. A week before the court date, Lauren received a response to the subpoenas we'd filed. What she found confirmed our suspicions and more. Your parents took out student loans in Trevor's name, but they used a significant portion of the funds for their own expenses, she explained, spreading bank statements across her desk. Home renovations, a cruise last year, a timeshare in Florida. Meanwhile, they've racked up credit card debt paying for Trevor's apartment and expenses since he left the 3rd college. Is that legal? I asked, stunned by the revelations. Using student loan funds for non-educational expenses is against the terms of the loans, Lauren said. It could potentially lead to the loans being called due immediately. At minimum, it shows financial mismanagement and raises serious ethical questions about their handling of money. The night before court, I barely slept. Despite all the preparation, despite the strength of our case, I felt a deep unease. These were my parents. However flawed, however unfair they'd been, I'd spent my life seeking their approval on some level. And tomorrow, in a public courtroom, our family dysfunction would be laid bare for strangers to judge. Ally came over with takeout and wine, insisting on keeping me company. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, filling our glasses, you've already won the most important battle. You've built a life they can't touch, a life entirely yours. I wished I could believe that. But the truth was, their lawsuit had already touched my life, forcing me to divert money to legal fees, consuming my thoughts, reviving old wounds I thought had scarred over. As Ally left that night, Diane called. "You remember what I told you when you started at the diner?" she asked without greeting. "That you were smarter at 16 than I was at 30? "I remember," I said. "I was right. And tomorrow, when you walk into that courtroom, I want you to remember something. You didn't just build financial independence. You built character. And that's something no court can take away from you." Her words steadied me, at least for the moment. Whatever came tomorrow, I would face it with the same determination that had carried me this far. The county courthouse was a stately brick building in downtown Lansing, its steps already busy with people when I arrived that morning. Lauren met me outside, professional and confident in a navy suit. "Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge addresses you directly," she reminded me. "Stay calm no matter what is said." Judges noticed demeanor. We found the assigned courtroom and took our seats at one of the tables in the front. Minutes later, my parents and Trevor entered with their attorney, a serious-looking man in his 60s. They sat at the table across from us without acknowledging my presence. Looking at them objectively, I was struck by how tired my parents looked. Dad's hair had more gray than I remembered, and Mom's face showed new lines of stress. Trevor, by contrast, seemed almost smug, slouching in his chair with an air of entitlement. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Harriet Coleman entered the courtroom. She was a black woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense expression and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. After the initial formalities, my parents' attorney, Mr. Donaldson, presented their case first. "Your Honor, this is a case about family obligation and equity," he began smoothly. "Jack and Martha Wilson devoted their lives to raising 2 children. Their daughter Luz, through a combination of natural ability and family support, has achieved financial success at a young age. Their son Trevor has faced greater challenges and requires additional support to find his footing in life." I clenched my hands under the table as he continued. "The Wilsons are not asking for support for themselves, Your Honor. They are simply asking the court to recognize that their daughter has a moral obligation to help her brother achieve similar opportunities to those she has enjoyed. They seek a more equitable distribution of family resources." Judge Coleman's expression remained neutral. "And what specific family resources are you referring to, Counselor?" "Miss Wilson recently purchased a house valued at approximately $200,000, Mr. Donaldson replied. "The Wilsons are asking that she either provide half that value to her brother or sell the property and divide the proceeds." "And what is the legal basis for this request?" the judge asked, peering over her glasses. Mr. Donaldson cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while there may not be a specific statute requiring sibling support, we argue that there was an informal understanding within the family that resources would be shared equitably. Miss Wilson benefited from family stability and support during her formative years, which directly contributed to her current success." Lauren stood as soon as he finished. "Your Honor, if I may respond to these claims?" The judge nodded. "Counsel's arguments are not only legally baseless but factually incorrect," Lauren stated firmly. "Far from benefiting from family support, my client has been entirely self-sufficient since the age of 16. She worked multiple jobs throughout high school and college while maintaining excellent grades. She received no financial support from her parents for her education or living expenses." Lauren methodically presented our evidence: my work history, bank statements showing my savings accumulation, scholarship documents, and college transcripts. "Your Honor, my client achieved her current position through extraordinary personal sacrifice and determination, not family support. The plaintiff's claim of an informal understanding about shared resources is particularly ironic, given that they maintained a college fund for their son but none for my client, a fact she discovered at age 16. Judge Coleman reviewed the documents we'd submitted, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Donaldson, do your clients dispute the defendant's work history or self-financing of her education?" My parents whispered urgently to their lawyer. "Your Honor, while my clients acknowledge that their daughter worked during her education, they maintain that they provided the stable home environment and emotional support that enabled her success. A stable home environment is the legal obligation of all parents to their minor children, Judge Coleman noted. It creates no special debt from child to parent or between siblings. She turned back to Lauren. Counselor, I understand you filed a countersuit? Yes, Your Honor. We're countersuing for funds wrongfully taken from my client's bank account and for legal fees necessitated by this frivolous lawsuit. Lauren explained the joint bank account situation and presented the bank statements, showing the withdrawal made 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Additionally, Your Honor, our subpoenas revealed troubling information about the plaintiff's financial management. She presented the evidence of my parents' use of Trevor's student loan money for personal expenses. Judge Coleman's eyebrows rose as she reviewed these documents. Mr. Donaldson, were you aware of these financial transactions? The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, my clients maintain that all financial decisions were made with the family's best interests at heart. The judge frowned. I'd like to hear directly from the parties. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, please approach the stand. My father was sworn in first. He appeared nervous, repeatedly adjusting his tie as he settled into the witness chair. Mr. Wilson, Judge Coleman began, can you explain why you believe your daughter owes financial support to her brother? Dad cleared his throat. We've always taught our children about family loyalty. Luz has been blessed with certain advantages. She's naturally smart, disciplined. Trevor needs more help to succeed. We just want things to be fair between our children. And did you maintain college funds for both your children? The judge asked. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We focused our resources where they were most needed. Luz was always capable of finding scholarships. So, that's a no. You did not maintain equal college funds? No, Your Honor. And did you provide any financial support for your daughter's education? Not directly, no. But we provided a home during high school, and she could have lived at home during college if she'd chosen to. The questioning continued, revealing the pattern of favoritism toward Trevor throughout our childhoods and the complete lack of financial support for my education or career. Mom's testimony was more emotional. She insisted repeatedly that different children need different types of support and that they had always believed I would land on my feet while Trevor needed extra help. When asked about the bank account withdrawal, she became defensive. That money was in a joint account. We needed it for expenses related to Trevor's situation. Luz hasn't used that account in years. Did you inform your daughter before withdrawing these funds? Judge Coleman asked. No, Mom admitted. But we didn't think she'd miss it, given her success. The most revealing moment came when Trevor took the stand. Initially, he maintained the family narrative that I had natural advantages while he struggled with learning differences that made academic success more difficult. But under the judge's direct questioning, cracks appeared in his story. Mr. Wilson, your parents have invested considerably in your education across 3 different institutions. Can you explain why you've been unable to complete a degree program? Trevor squirmed. College isn't for everyone. I have different talents. And what are those talents? He couldn't give a concrete answer. Your sister worked 2 jobs while maintaining a high GPA. Did you work during your time in college? No, he admitted. My parents wanted me to focus on studies. Then came the question that changed everything. Did your parents ever tell you that your sister would be expected to share her financial success with you? Trevor glanced at our parents, then back at the judge. Yes, he said. They always said that once Luz got established, she'd help the family out. That's how families work. They said her success would be all of our success. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. All those years, while I was working myself to exhaustion, my parents had been promising Trevor that he'd eventually benefit from my hard work. Lauren squeezed my arm gently. This helps us, she whispered. Lauren explained the joint bank account situation and presented the bank statements showing the withdrawal made 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. I fled to the courthouse bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally let the tears come. Not just for today's revelations, but for years of unequal treatment, for the family support I'd never received, for the twisted logic that had turned my hard-earned success into something I supposedly owed to others. The bathroom door opened, and I heard Diane's voice calling my name. In here, I managed, wiping my eyes and unlocking the stall door. Diane stood there, looking uncharacteristically formal in a blazer and slacks. "I took the day off to be here," she explained, handing me a tissue. "Didn't want to distract you before, but I'm here now. And listen to me, you're winning in there." "It doesn't feel like winning," I said, trying to compose myself. "It feels like publicly destroying whatever was left of my family relationships." "No, honey," Diane said firmly. "They destroyed those relationships years ago with their choices. All you're doing is refusing to be their victim any longer." I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied the minimal makeup I'd worn. As we were about to leave the bathroom, the door opened again. A woman in her early 60s entered, stopping short when she saw me. "Luz Wilson? I thought that was you in the courtroom." It took me a moment to recognize Miss Peterson, my high school guidance counselor. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. "Your Aunt Carol called me," she explained. "Said you might need a character witness. I brought some records that might help." Back in the courtroom, Lauren was equally surprised, but quickly spoke with Miss Peterson and reviewed the documents she'd brought. Copies of my high school records, including notes from meetings with my parents. "Your Honor," Lauren addressed the judge when court resumed, "we have an additional witness who has just arrived with relevant documentation." Judge Coleman allowed Miss Peterson to testify. She explained that as my guidance counselor, she had tried multiple times to discuss college planning with my parents. They refused to complete financial aid forms for Luz, she testified, presenting her contemporaneous notes from these meetings. They stated explicitly that they were reserving their resources for their son's education, and that Luz would need to make her own way. I've never, in 30 years of counseling, seen parents so blatantly favor one child over another. Her testimony was brief but powerful, providing independent verification of my parents' pattern of behavior from a professional who had witnessed it firsthand. When all testimony concluded, Judge Coleman took off her glasses and addressed the courtroom. "This court deals with many family disputes, but this case is particularly troubling," she began. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, you have presented no legal basis for your demand that your daughter share her hard-earned assets with your son. More disturbingly, you have demonstrated a pattern of favoritism and differential treatment that this court finds unconscionable." My parents sat rigid in their seats as she continued. "Parents are not legally obligated to pay for their children's college education or to provide equal financial support to each child. But when one child is systematically denied the emotional and financial support freely given to another, and then is expected to compensate for that inequity by supporting the favored child, we have moved from parental discretion into something far more problematic." The judge shuffled her papers. "I am dismissing the Wilson suit against their daughter as having no merit whatsoever. Further, I am granting Miss Wilson's countersuit for the funds wrongfully withdrawn from her account, plus legal fees." She looked directly at my parents. "I am also referring this matter to the Department of Education for investigation into the potential misuse of student loan funds. If substantiated, there may be serious consequences." With a final tap of her gavel, it was over. We had won completely. Lauren smiled and shook my hand. "Congratulations. This was as clear-cut a victory as they come." As we gathered our papers, I glanced over at my parents. They sat stunned, as if unable to comprehend the outcome. Trevor was already heading for the door, not looking back. Outside the courtroom, my parents brushed past me without a word. Only my father hesitated briefly, looking as if he might speak, before following my mother down the hallway. I stood on the courthouse steps, legal victory in hand, but feeling strangely hollow. Diane, Lauren, and Miss Peterson surrounded me, offering congratulations and support. "What happens now?" I asked no one in particular. "Now," Diane said firmly, "you go back to living your life on your terms, without their shadows hanging over you." It sounded simple, but as I watched my parents' car pull away from the courthouse, I knew that emotional resolution would be far more complicated than legal victory. The weeks following the court case were strangely quiet. I returned to work, continued improving my house, and tried to process everything that had happened. My parents made no attempt to contact me, not even to arrange payment for the court-ordered restitution and legal fees. Lauren handled that part, sending formal letters requesting payment. Eventually, a cashier's check arrived with no note attached. "At least they're complying with the court order," she noted when I told her. "That's something." I threw myself into work and home projects, staying busy to avoid dwelling on the family fracture. Brian was supportive, giving me interesting projects that challenged me professionally. My little house continued to improve with each weekend's efforts. The neighborhood was noticeably changing too, with more houses being renovated and property values climbing steadily. One evening, about 6 weeks after the court case, I was replanting my front flower beds when a familiar car pulled up. Trevor got out, looking uncomfortable, and nothing like the confident figure he'd presented in court. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans, unsure what to expect. "Can we talk?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. I gestured to the front porch steps. We sat side by side, an awkward silence stretching between us. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here," he finally said. "They'd probably freak out if they did." "Why are you here, Trevor?" I asked directly. He sighed heavily. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe to yell at you, maybe to understand. I don't know." "Yell away if it helps," I said, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. He looked at me sharply. "You really think you did nothing wrong? You humiliated our parents in court. You made them look terrible." "They did that themselves," I replied. "All I did was tell the truth about how differently we were treated our whole lives." "Yeah, well, they had their reasons." "Which were?" Trevor ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from childhood that it momentarily transported me back. "They always said I needed more help, that things came easily to you but not to me." "Did they ever consider that maybe I just worked harder?" I asked. "That maybe if they'd held you to the same standards instead of making excuses, you might have developed better habits?" He looked away. "Maybe. I don't know. It's just... Do you have any idea what it's like to live in your shadow? Perfect lose, who never needed help, who did everything right the first time." With a final tap of her gavel, it was over. We had won completely. Something in my voice must have reached him, because he finally looked at me directly. "I never saw it that way. Mom and Dad always made it sound like you had all these natural advantages. The only advantage I had was learning early that I could only count on myself." We sat in silence for a while, the evening air cooling around us. "Mr. Wilson, your parents have invested considerably in your education across 3 different institutions. Can you explain why you've been unable to complete a degree program?" "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "Despite everything, I didn't wish them hardship." "The judge was right about the student loans," he continued. "They used a lot of that money for their own stuff. Now the loans are in my name, but I have no degree to show for it and no way to pay them back. I made it in my woodworking class," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's not perfect, but—" "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly, seeing my expression. "That's not why I came. I don't know what to do next. Everything's falling apart, and for the first time, Mom and Dad don't seem to have a plan for fixing it for me." There was a new humility in his voice that I'd never heard before. And despite years of resentment, despite the lawsuit and all that had happened, I felt a flicker of compassion for him. He was, in many ways, as much a victim of our parents' dysfunctional dynamics as I was, just in a completely different way. "What do you want, Trevor? Not what Mom and Dad want for you, but what do you actually want for your life?" He seemed startled by the question. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that before. The revelation was sad, but not surprising. Our parents had always dictated his path, cushioning him from consequences, but also from the self-knowledge that comes from making your own choices and living with them. "Well, I'm asking now," I said. Trevor thought for a long moment. "I like working with my hands, building things, fixing things. I was good in wood shop in high school, but Mom and Dad thought that was just a hobby, not a real career path." It was the first genuine interest I'd ever heard him express. "There are good careers in the trades," I said. "Skilled carpenters, electricians, plumbers, they make solid money and can't be outsourced. There are apprenticeship programs, technical certifications. You think I could do that?" There was a vulnerability in his question that cut through years of resentment. I think you could do anything you actually want to do if you're willing to put in the work, I said honestly. The problem has never been your capability, Trevor. It's been the expectation that things should come to you without effort. He flinched but didn't argue. How do I even start? You get a job. Any job. You show up every day, on time. You save some money. You research programs in whatever trade interests you most. You apply. And then you work harder than you've ever worked before to complete it. Just like that? He sounded skeptical. No, not just like that. It's going to be hard. You'll want to quit. But if you stick with it, you'll build something that actually belongs to you, not because anyone handed it to you, but because you earned it. The conversation continued as darkness fell. For perhaps the first time in our lives, we spoke to each other as adults, without our parents' influence coloring every interaction. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were too many years of hurt on both sides for that. But it was a beginning. I should go, Trevor finally said, standing up. They'll wonder where I am. As he turned to leave, I made a decision. Trevor, I'm not giving you money, but if you're serious about making changes, I'll help you figure out next steps. I know people in construction and development who could advise on trade programs. I can help you put together a resume, but only if you're really willing to do the work. He paused, then nodded. I might take you up on that. Over the following months, to my surprise, he did. Trevor got a job at a home improvement store, entry-level, minimum wage, but a start. He enrolled in night classes at the technical college, studying carpentry. He found a cheap apartment with roommates. Our relationship developed cautiously, through text messages about job applications and occasional coffee meetings to discuss his progress. He seemed to be discovering a new version of himself, one defined by his own choices rather than our parents' expectations. My parents were another matter entirely. For 3 months after the court case, there was no contact. Then, around Thanksgiving, I received a stiff email from my mother. We are having dinner at 3 on Thursday. You are welcome to attend if you wish. No apology, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened, just a grudging invitation that made it clear they were extending an obligation, not a genuine welcome. I declined politely, choosing instead to spend the holiday with Diane and her family. 2 weeks later, my father called. Our conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful phrasing. Your mother and I have been doing some thinking, he said finally. We may have made some mistakes along the way. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. We're trying to do better with Trevor now. He tells us you've been helping him with his technical school plans. I've been giving him advice when he asks for it, I confirmed. Another long pause. That's good of you, considering everything. I'm not doing it for you or Mom, I clarified. I'm doing it because despite everything, he's still my brother. Dad cleared his throat. Would you consider, your mother and I would like to try to mend things. Somehow. I closed my eyes, sorting through the complex emotions his request triggered. I'm not ready for that yet, I said finally. Too much has happened. But I'm not saying never. It was the most honest answer I could give. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too profound for easy reconciliation. But I was leaving the door open a crack, not for their sake, but for my own healing. Meanwhile, my professional life continued to flourish. Brian offered me a partnership track position at his company, impressed with my work and the initiative I'd shown. My first house had increased in value by almost 30% in just over a year, thanks to my improvements and the neighborhood's rising profile. Inspired by Diane's example, I started an investment club for women interested in financial independence. Ally was our first member, eager to take control of her finances rather than relying on her family's wealth. Several women from my office joined, along with a couple of my neighbors. We met monthly to discuss investment strategies, real estate opportunities, and financial education. It gave me unexpected joy to share what I'd learned, to watch other women grow in confidence as they took control of their financial futures. For many, like me, it wasn't just about money. It was about freedom, security, and self-determination. Trevor's transformation was slower but steady. 6 months after our porch conversation, he He had completed his first semester of technical courses with solid grades. He'd been promoted to the contractor sales desk at the home improvement store, a position that allowed him to learn more about building materials and methods. "I'm helping build a deck this weekend with one of the contractors I met at work," he told me during one of our coffee meetings. "Off the books, but good experience." "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased for him. "How are things with Mom and Dad?" He sighed. "Complicated. They're trying, I think. Dad's job situation is still shaky. They had to sell the timeshare. But the biggest change is that they've stopped trying to solve everything for me. Maybe they can't afford to anymore, but whatever the reason, it's actually better this way." "You're standing on your own feet," I observed. "Trying to," he agreed. "It's harder than I thought it would be, but also, I don't know. More satisfying?" When I finished that first semester, those grades were mine. Not because anyone pulled strings or hired tutors, but because I did the work. I recognized the pride in his voice, the same feeling I'd had when I'd achieved my own milestones through persistence and effort. A year after the court case, I decided to host another BBQ at my house. This time, the guest list included Diane and her family, Allie and Brian, coworkers, neighbors, and the women from my investment club. After some deliberation, I also invited Trevor. "Can I bring someone?" he asked when he accepted. The someone turned out to be Rachel, a fellow student from his technical program. They had been dating for a couple of months, his first relationship that hadn't been orchestrated or approved by our parents. The day of the BBQ was sunny and perfect. My house looked even better than it had a year earlier, with a new deck, which Trevor had helped build as weekend practice, and landscaping that had matured beautifully. As guests mingled in the backyard, I found myself thinking about the journey of the past year. The court case, that had seemed so devastating, had actually been liberating, forcing a reckoning that had been necessary for all of us. Trevor approached me as I was arranging food on the outdoor table, Rachel beside him. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden box, with my name inlaid in contrasting wood on the lid. "I made it in my woodworking class," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's not perfect, but it's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." Rachel smiled. He worked on it for weeks. Redid the inlay 3 times until he got it right. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented something significant. Trevor putting sustained effort into creating something with his own hands, something meant to give pleasure to someone else, rather than to gain something for himself. As the party continued around us, Trevor lowered his voice. "Mom and Dad asked about you again. I think they're finally starting to understand what they did. Maybe someday we can all sit down together," I said. "Not yet, but someday." Later, as evening approached and guests began to leave, I found myself sitting on the deck steps with Diane, just as we had sat on my porch cleaning up after that disastrous first BBQ. "Look at all this," she said, gesturing to the yard full of people, my thriving house, the evidence of prosperity and community I'd built. "This is what success really looks like. Not just the material stuff, but this. Connections, purpose, independence." "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," I told her. She shook her head. "You'd have found your way no matter what. I just gave you a few shortcuts. The determination was all yours." As twilight softened the edges of the day, I looked around at the life I'd built, my home, my career, my chosen family of friends. The path hadn't been easy or straight. There had been pain and betrayal, hard work and sacrifice. But through it all, I'd stayed true to myself and my values. The greatest lesson wasn't about money or property or even independence. It was about defining success on my own terms, about breaking the cycles of toxic family dynamics, and about the power of genuine support versus obligation. My story wasn't over. There were still chapters to write with Trevor, with my parents, with my career and investments. But, for the first time, I felt completely free to write those chapters my own way, without seeking approval or fearing judgment from those who had never truly seen me. As the last guest departed and I stood in my doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of promise, I knew with absolute certainty, the life you build yourself, brick by difficult brick, is infinitely more valuable than anything handed to you, and no one can take it away unless you let them. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family expectations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to forge their own path, even when family doesn't understand. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it, but by your own knowledge of what you've overcome to become who you are.